Well, hey everybody, it is Pastor Mitchell here. Thanks so much for joining us today, whether you are in person or watching online. We're glad you're a part of what we do together as a church family. And just a few reminders, if you are here in the room this morning, just to let you know that nursery is now open for children up to age 3. And for those up to age 10, you guys can head on downstairs for Lighthouse Cove Continued. We've got some exciting things there for you to participate in this morning. And as well, if you've come prepared to give, I want to remind you of the offering box on the back table on your way out. Or if you want to give by e-transfer, you can simply do that by sending it to apbchurch75@gmail.com. And thanks so much for your generosity, particularly through this Christmas season. Now, speaking of generosity, first I want to say thank you so much to everybody who's brought in gifts for Nikhil or for Juniper House. Today is the deadline for those gifts. We're going to be dropping them off tomorrow at their respective locations. And thank you for participating in that. We've got 2 red bins of stuff that we want to drop off to bless the people at those spaces. And so thank you so much. As well, speaking of generosity, just a reminder that next Sunday is the deadline for contributing to Canadian Baptist Ministries campaigns that we've highlighted, whether that's the Hopeful Gifts for Change catalog or financial support toward peoples who are part of the Missing tribe in Assam, India, or if you are planning to support Merrill Green, who's one of our own who's serving First Peoples in New Brunswick. He could certainly use some financial support toward his missions work, and want to encourage you to give toward him over the next couple of weeks in particular as well. And then finally, on the topic of generosity, we do have a benevolence fund that you have made donations to and made possible that we are able to bless others as they have needs both within our church and community. And so if you know of someone this Christmas season that could use a little extra help, please let me know, and we'll do our best to meet that need out of those funds that you have given. Now, a few things up and coming I want to remind you of and let you know of that you want to pay attention to. Some new and some just further details you want to know. First of all, this weekend we are doing a scavenger hunt throughout our community. So starting at 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, there will be kits available through the weekend here at the church that you can pick up between Saturday at 10 a.m. and Sunday at 4 o'clock. We certainly want to invite you to grab a kit with your family or your group of friends. There are 4 challenges to the scavenger hunt that can happen. There are codes to unlock, there are places to go, photos to be taken. You just need a car to get you from A to B and a phone with the camera on it to take the pictures. Certainly, we think it's going to take probably 1 to 2 hours for you to complete. It's open to anybody in the community that wants to participate. So again, pick up your scavenger hunt kit starting at 10 o'clock on Saturday. You can do it anytime through the weekend up till Sunday at 4 o'clock. I want to encourage great participation in that as something extra and fun to do for you this Christmas season as well. Next Sunday evening here at the church at 6:30, we're going to be hosting a Christmas carol sing. We want to encourage you to pre-register for that service, and you can do that by contacting Barbara or registering online through the normal registration link. So it's a carol sing next Sunday night at 6:30 here at the church. Also, Karen Conrad is going to be hosting a box packing party at her place on Monday, December the 21st. We have about 15 different boxes that need to be packed to be distributed out through the community. And so if you have some things that are baked goods that are individually wrapped that you want to contribute to those boxes, or some other kind of special treats that are individually wrapped, you can make sure you get those to Karen. And if you want to help pack those boxes, it'll be happening at her place again on Monday, December 21st at 9:30 in the morning. And so any other questions, please contact Karen about that. And then finally, one last thing I'll mention today is Christmas services we're so excited about. We're going to be hosting 2 Christmas Eve services this year, one at 4:30, one at 6 o'clock. Registration is going to be open for the main sanctuary seating area, as well as a live video stream in the downstairs part of the church as a kind of an overflow area as well. Registration for those particular areas will be separate, so you'll know which one you're registering for when you register, but want to encourage you to jump right on that December 24th at 4:30 and 6 here at the church for our Christmas Eve service. And just want to remind you too that as we head into those services. Just be careful to honor the recommendations from the Department of Health in Nova Scotia with regard to masks and social distancing, as well as family who might be traveling or attending outside of our zone or outside of the province. Please be respectful of those regulations there as well. And then again on Christmas Day at 10 o'clock in the morning, we're going to be hosting a different service here at APBC. I want to encourage you to pre-register for that as well. There's only going to be the upstairs portion available for that service. And so all that information is going to be on Facebook, but want to encourage you to register early, as we're sure that those services are going to start to fill up fast. So that's what's happening through this Christmas season. Any questions about anything, please let me know. And we hope that today's message both encourages and inspires you in taking your next step in trusting in and following Jesus. So I wanted to begin this morning with kind of a survey or one of those questions. Like I'll ask a question and we'll do a straw poll. Is that all right? Can we do that? So everyone just practice by raising your hand for a second. Okay. This is a full participation event. Okay. So now you've got that. Excellent. Okay. So I'm going to have a series of 5 kind of rapid fire questions, and then I'm going to ask, is it A or B is going to be your decision. Okay. So these shouldn't be embarrassing for you, but we'll see how go. Okay, so first question is this. Would you rather give up Christmas trees or Christmas cookies? I know, it's so hard, right? So how many would say Christmas trees you'd rather give up? How many would say you'd rather give up Christmas cookies? Oh, wow, okay, there you go. Okay, so giving up Christmas cookies is the favored winner there. Okay, next question. If you had one Christmas album to listen to, would you rather it be Mariah Carey or Bing Crosby? All right, so those are your only options. There's no other choice in this question, okay? So would you rather Mariah Carey? Anybody? Okay, a few. How about Bing Crosby? Yeah, okay, the classic. Most are going with the classic on that one, Bing Crosby, okay? Third question. Would you rather Christmas Day be cold and snowy or warm with green grass? All the golfers in the room are like, well, that's pretty obvious, right? Cold and snowy. Who votes cold and snowy? All right, warm and green grass? All right, so like 3. Okay, so cold and snowy it is. Very good. Okay, here's the next one. Would you rather drink eggnog or hot chocolate? How many for eggnog? No, you can only pick one. Hot chocolate? Who would want an eggnog hot chocolate? Okay, okay. So okay. We'll have a compromise on that one. Okay. Here's the last one. The best Christmas trees are either real or artificial. Which one? Okay. How many say real? All right, the best Christmas tree, how many say artificial? Ooh, we're pretty much split down the middle on that one. Now, that's fascinating. This debate kind of comes up in our home most every Christmas because, we like to put our tree up early and we like to keep it up late, but we don't like a brown tree at the end of the season, right? And so it's always hard, so we're always kind of up in the air on that. Now, here's my other question for you. There's a bonus one. How many of you just didn't answer any of the questions along the way? Did anybody just kind of sit out on some of them? Yeah, I got one in the balcony. I see friends pointing at friends. Some decisions in life are easy, right? And some are hard. We were actually out for dinner last night at a place that I don't usually go out to dinner to. And, when you go to all your familiar restaurants, you know what's on the menu. And if you're like me, you have the things that you typically just always order, right? So there's like 2 or 3, maybe 4 things that you're like, yeah, depending on how I'm feeling that day at this restaurant, this is what I'm going to eat. Well, and it's a brand new kind of like, I've been there once before, I think. And so I'm looking at the menu and I'm just paralyzed, right? And we had all this time to look at it, and then the hostess comes around and says, well, what would you like to order, right? And I'm still right looking at this thing, and I'm even like the last person to order, and she gets to me and she looks at me, and I'm just like, I still don't know. And so anyway, and then it came to the dessert menu after that, which is even worse, right? And so I'm looking at all the desserts, and in fact, somebody at our table said, yeah, I can just see it. The spinning wheel is just turning, right? As Ryan would say, it's still loading. right? And that's just what's going on in my head. And so there are some decisions in life that are easy and some that are a little bit harder. And for some of us we're quick to make decisions, right? We're comfortable with just kind of snap decisions. I'll make the quick decision based on as much information as I have right now, and we'll just figure the rest out. Some of us are just kind of slow to make decisions because we're just slow to make decisions. And some of us are slow because we like to be thorough, right? Like, which is the category I like to say that I'm in. I'm slower because I'm thorough. I want to think through all the possibilities, right? Is the English toffee, dessert going to sit better, or the peanut butter pie? Like that's a big decision, right? So, but we kind of make light of some of those kinds of decisions, but there are other decisions in life that carry weightier consequences, right? Or they're heavier decisions to make, or harder decisions to make, right? The decision about dessert might give you a problem, of how full your stomach feels for a few hours, but the decision about perhaps a large purchase you're going to make might stick with you a little bit longer and have different consequences. And I think for a lot of us, we like to process through, at least many people I talk to, we like to process through, some helpful insights into decisions, particularly large ones. And so this happens from everything from when you order something on Amazon, right? You look at the reviews and see what everybody else has said about the product. And if it's only a 1-star review, the chances of me buying it are going to be a lot less than if it's like 4-star reviews from people. It's like, oh, this product was awesome. And so we have those kinds of things. But when it happens, when it comes to like investments and investment strategies, you want to talk to somebody with some financial understanding or know-how. You might want to talk to even an accountant when it comes to your business or business decisions. When it comes to relationship advice, you might want to talk to somebody who's kind of been through that before, or somebody who knows the situation, and you want to talk about the relationship issue or whatever it might be. When it comes to health decisions, we want to get counsel from doctors and experts and surgeons and all the rest, so we can understand and intake all the information from their area of expertise. And good counsel can be really helpful, but there can also be bad counsel, which is often destructive. And perhaps you found yourself in that situation before. You've been in situations where you've got good counsel, and because of someone's insight, that's helped you make a better decision. Or perhaps you've been in a space before where somebody's counsel to you was just bad counsel. It just wasn't good, and that contributed to your decision making that led to some kind of destructive decision in the end. The scriptures are full of all kinds of stories of people making decisions, and all those decisions, and most of them are very complicated and layered and have a lot to them. And Matthew, the writer of the Gospel of Matthew, who was a tax collector for the Roman Empire in Israel, who became a Jesus follower, who was an eyewitness to the life events of Jesus. He spent 3 years hearing him talk, seeing the things that he did. Matthew, who spent all that time with Jesus, saw him resurrected, is now later on looking back and writes down the account of the life story of Jesus in what we call the Gospel of Matthew. And Matthew, right out of the gate, tells us about a time when a man by the name of Joseph was forced to make a very difficult decision, and he needed good counsel. And so Matthew chapter 1, starting at verse 18, we read these words, and this is Matthew's account of the birth story of Jesus. It says, "Now the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way." Now let me just pause there for a second, because if any of you have, kind of been, you're in your family, there's been somebody who's had a baby, right? If you're about to be a parent, on the best day, on the best of circumstances, you want the best counsel you can get when you know there's a baby coming, right? Like, even in the best of times, you want good counsel about how to be a good parent. How do I take care of this child? How do I raise this kid? How do I, make sure that the child is fed and properly cared for and grows to be healthy? And how do I bear that responsibility of parenting? Like, on the best of days, in the best of circumstances, you want all the help that you can get. But for Joseph, it got really complicated really quick. Why? Because when his mother, that's the mother of the baby, Mary, Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, which is, similar to engagement. We've said this before. I've told you many times that in that day there was a legal pledge. That's what the engagement was. There was actually a legality to it. And so it wasn't like you got down on one knee and presented a ring and said, will you marry me? And they say yes. And then it's not until the actual marriage and the signing of the certificate and the ceremony happens that it's a legal thing. But at this point, like the engagement part or the betrothal part, there was actually a legal aspect to it that to break off the engagement would take legal process and would be the equivalent of divorce at that point. And so for Matthew right now, or for Matthew tells us the story of Joseph, who his fiancée, his betrothed, the woman he's engaged to, Mary, before they came together, right? Let all the adults in the room understand. Let the hearer understand what's being communicated here. She was found to be with child. But that got complicated really quick, didn't it? And Matthew tells us now it's from the Holy Spirit. Now this is a whole other thing, and I get that if it's difficult for us to kind of track with that and say, okay, I know for some of us it's like that's where we shut down. That's where I don't listen to the story. This is just too far-fetched. There's too much to it. I get that, and maybe it would help if you understand that Joseph felt the exact same way, right? This is not a sanitized story of a man who just simply said, oh, I read that in a book somewhere and I just believed it. No. Matthew had a hard time getting this too. Right? And so here's Joseph, Joseph had a hard time getting this too. Joseph is betrothed to Mary, finds out she is with child, but literally it's a miracle. It's of the Holy Spirit, this child is, but it's not Joseph's. And so what's Joseph going to do? What counsel is he going to receive? How is he going to process through this? What's his decision going to be? This is a complex, complicated, layered thing, perhaps, as we think it through. So here's what Matthew tells us happens. It says in verse 19, her husband Joseph, being a just man, right? That speaks to his character. He's just a good, just man, and he's unwilling to put her to shame. He resolved to divorce her quietly. But as he considered these things, right? So he's made up his mind. He has this resolve. He's made a decision. His will is toward, right? He's just gonna quietly put this all away and put this behind, right? He's not going to make a big deal because in that day it was possible, according to the law, that the penalty for adultery could be death, right? The death penalty was actually written in the legal code as a possibility for a consequence of adultery that could happen. But in those days it was more to the public shame end of things, right? And that people talked, or maybe, there was just kind of all kinds of public shame issues that could be connected to it when it was found out and exposed and brought to light. And so what Joseph decides to do, instead of making it a big issue because he has some compassion for Mary, what's he going to do? He's just going to divorce her quietly. That's what he resolved in his heart. That's what his purpose or intention was. And could anybody fault him for that? Would anybody look at Joseph and go, Joseph, you are off your rocker, man. What do you do? And no, you got to stay. Right, like would anybody say to Joseph, no, right? Because this would be a just thing to do. No one could fault him for that. He resolved to divorce her quietly, but as he considered these things, as he thought through, as he meditated on it, as he reflected, that's what the word consider means here, it is not a snap decision. Right? It's not going to be an in the moment, right? Which dessert is this? This is an entirely different thing, right? And so as he's thinking this through, and no doubt it wasn't just like, what do I do? But now that I've made up my mind about what I do, how in the world do I do it? How do I tell her? When do we have that conversation? At what point do I bring this up and say, hey, it's over between us, Mary? That's how this is playing out. As he considered these things, something happened. Verse 20 says this, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, so there's some unsolicited advice given to Joseph, but it comes from someone who carries weight. There's an angel that appears to him in a dream, says, Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife. Now, why would the angel say, don't fear to take Mary as your wife? Well, because there's all kinds of fears attached to it. Right? Because at this point, if he sticks with her, Mary's shame, perceived shame by everybody else, becomes his shame. He bears the weight of the same shame that she is going to bear, and if he's going to stick with her, I mean, can you just imagine the kind of messy, rocky start this is to their marriage relationship? Right out of the gate, full of controversy, full of family members and people weighing in about what Joseph should do or shouldn't do, or how Mary should respond or shouldn't respond, or what should be done to Mary, or whether Joseph should, like all of these things. And how did this all happen? And well, maybe it is Joseph's baby, who knows? And so there's all of this. And the angel says, look, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife. And I want to kind of pause here for a second and ask this question. How often for you and I does fear drive our decision making? How often have you found yourself coming to, you have to make a significant decision or a weighty decision, maybe it's just a smaller decision even, but the decision that you are going to make is motivated mostly by fear. The decision that you decide on, the thing that you resolve that you're going to do, is because of the fear of one thing or another. How often does that happen? There's all kinds of research done in this area by psychologists. It's fascinating if you read through cognitive bias and what cognitive bias is, and different types of cognitive bias. The way that a series of decisions that we make end up becoming a cognitive bias that we have, and so we get in what we would call a pattern of thinking, right? And that's how when we come to a decision making, there's all kinds of other decisions we've made before that have kind of lent a cognitive bias to us, that when we come to this decision, our bias is going to be toward making a similar decision just because that's what's been our cognitive bias all along. So with cognitive bias, it's fascinating to read about that. Sometimes we make those decisions based on emotions in the moment as to how we're feeling, right? And what I'm going to do as a result of just how I'm feeling, whether it's anger, whether it's sadness, right? Whether it's just pure joy. But let me ask the question: how often, again, do we base some of our or much of our decision making on the fear of what may or may not happen? And sometimes, even in that fear can be rational or irrational, right? I mean, there is a healthy fear that we need to be aware of, isn't there? Like, there's healthy fears that we would have. It's proportionate. A healthy fear is proportionate to actual risk. Right? So that's why if I get close to the edge of the stage, I should have a healthy fear of the fact that I need to pay attention as to where my feet are. Because if I take another step, I'm going to land either on the candles or onto the floor, and I could I'll probably break something, right? It just wouldn't be good. But I shouldn't underreact about it, like just pretend it doesn't exist and start swinging my feet around. And I shouldn't overreact by, making sure that I stand way back here the whole time so that I don't get too close, because that can be an overreaction. You take that and you put that into any kind of other decision making that you have, right? There is healthy fear that's proportionate to the actual risk, and it's responsible and it's reasonable, but then there's unhealthy fear which is disproportionate to the actual risk that we tend to overreact or underreact. We need to be careful in our decision making about how much of it is based simply out of a place of fear. Now Joseph, right? The angel says to Joseph, look, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife. And no, it's not going to be as simple as that might sound or as it might want to be. But don't be afraid to take that step and to do that right thing. He goes on then to say this. He says, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. Mary has not been cheating on you, Joseph. This is actually an act of God. She will bear a son, and you will call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. This is not salvation from Roman occupation, from big government or big brother. It's not salvation. It's so much more significant than that. It is that he will save his people from their sins, from their offenses against God, if there are offenses against others that carry all kinds of consequences. This baby that Mary is carrying is going to be no ordinary child. And what he is going to do will bring salvation, redemption for people from their sin and its consequence. And then he goes on to say this, all of this took place, Matthew gives us the commentary, to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. And the prophet in this case is Isaiah, who some 700 years before this spoke of a child that would be born, right? And so you go all the way back to Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, and Matthew's going to quote it for us. He says, "Behold, the virgin will conceive and bear a son, and they will call his name Emmanuel." So Matthew references way back to some 700 years ago where God spoke through the prophet Isaiah to King Ahaz and said, look, there is going to be a sign given, and the virgin's going to conceive, she's going to bear a son, he's going to be Emmanuel. And then Matthew gives the explanation, just in case we didn't know, Emmanuel means God with us. Literally, this child is going to be God with us. And Joseph, don't forget this, that God will be with you in what you are about to do. In fact, you keep reading Isaiah chapter 9, which is where we've kind of based all of this conversation out of. Isaiah chapter 9 says this. We have it up there? Yeah. "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given." In a future time, right, there's going to be a child born, a son that's going to be given in the line of David, unlike any other. He's going to be hope of the world, light to the nations, right? And the government will be on his shoulders, and his name shall be called, right? The burden of ruling and leading will be on him, and the expression of his character is going to look like this. His name shall be called, he will be a good king, right? His name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Wonderful Counselor. Now, some would want to designate these as two separate titles, perhaps, and we could probably do that and end up with kind of the same thing, right? Wonderful Counselor or Wonderful Counselor. The idea is that he is a wonder of a counselor, or one who counsels wonderful things. Right? That's what's being communicated. And the whole thing, just jump back there for a second. That whole phrase, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, in the Hebrew, it's actually 4 sets of 2 compound words that actually makes up one whole title. It's in fact, in the Hebrew, it's like one long designation that's kind of all run together. In English, we kind of split them up as 4 kind of couplets, but the idea here is that they kind of all go together, and they're considered as a whole thing. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. 8 compounded words all at once. And this child, the Messiah, will have about him, there will be a sense of wonder about him. He will be distinguished, made great, set apart, different. The Messiah will be full of great wisdom. Now, for the Jews at the time, they had a whole section of wisdom literature in the scriptures, right? There's a whole section of wisdom literature. Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs. Like these are all part of the wisdom collection in the Old Testament. And Solomon, of course, is called the greatest and most wise person who ever lived, the most wise person who ever lived. In fact, the Queen of Sheba came and visited him for 6 months because she heard about his wisdom and she wanted to come see for herself. And when she left, she said, man, there is no one more wise than him. Right? She marveled at Solomon's wisdom. And then when we come to the life of Jesus, what's said about Jesus is this, that one greater than Solomon is actually here. Right? And so Wonderful Counselor. So how does this play out? I mean, you read through the Gospels, there's some fascinating things that happen. And Jesus consistently demonstrated this to be true of him in his own life and ministry, that he is a wonderful counselor. Think about this for a second. In chapter 2 of Luke, when Jesus is just a small boy, right? And they've come to Jerusalem, right? And they go there for one of the celebrations. And as his parents leave, right, what does he do? He sticks around and stays behind. And his parents assume, well, he's just kind of with the rest of the crowd. And they get about a day or 2 out and they realize nobody can find Jesus. And so they start to panic because nobody knows where he is because everybody thought somebody else had him, right? And so they go back to Jerusalem and they start looking for him and they find him in the temple. And what is he doing? As a young boy, a small child, He's talking with the scribes and the Pharisees and the learned men of the day, and he's asking them questions, and they're asking him questions, and the scriptures say that they are just astounded by his understanding and his answers and the kinds of questions he's asking. And so even from a young age, as a young child, the great religious thinkers of the day are just amazed by the way that this child, the things that he knows, the things that he understands, the kinds of questions that he asks. You move into Luke chapter 4, Jesus now some 30 years old, and he's in his hometown of Nazareth, and he's teaching in the synagogue one Sabbath. And as he's there, he begins to talk, and he opens up the scroll of Isaiah, and he speaks, and it says everybody kind of marveled at his words. Right? They listened to how this guy could speak, and they marveled. They were, in fact, it says, amazed at his gracious words. They're just blown away. Like, this guy, wow, right? And so then Matthew chapter 7, we have the 7 to 9, we have the longest section, recorded section of any message Jesus ever gave. We call it the Sermon on the Mount. And at the end of his sermon, what did the people do? They cheered. Like, this is amazing. We've never heard anything like this before. Like, none of our scribes, none of the Pharisees, none of our teachers of the law have ever said anything like this. And they're just so impressed. They're amazed at his teaching. In Mark chapter 12, as Jesus enters into Jerusalem, I'm just kind of cherry picking some of these out of here, but in Mark chapter 12, as Jesus enters into Jerusalem just before he's about to be crucified, right, murdered, taken away, what happens? They try to trap him in his words, and there's 3 different groups of people that come to Jesus to ask him a question. First, it's the Pharisees and the Herodians, which is religion and politics. The 2 parties join forces to try to trip him up so they can ask him a question to indemnify him so that they can have some charges laid against him in order to throw him in jail, and if not, at least even have him killed, right? And so they begin to ask the question, and it's a question about taxes. And what happens? Well, they ask him the question, and Jesus asks for a coin, and then they're all kind of like, well, I don't know, who's got a coin? Everybody got a coin? And they give him the coin. He's like, whose image is on this coin? And he says, in the end, the one-liner at the end is give to Caesar what's Caesar's and give to God what is God's, right? And both of them are kind of nervous now because they're like, well, which is it, right? And he, they can't find anything to accuse him of. And then the Sadducees come and say, well, here's this scenario where this happens and this happens and this happens. And so in the end, whose husband, whose wife is this woman going to be? And so there's this long drawn out story. And Jesus' answer just stumps them and amazes them. And the crowds are like, man, we haven't heard anything like this. And then the religious expert stands up and says, what's the greatest commandment of all the commands in the law of Moses? What's the most important one? And all right, what's the answer? It's to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. There's no greater commandment than any of these things. And just with his wisdom and understanding, his counsel into the lives of people that he ministered to, right? Of the tough things of life, of the awkward situations, of all the rest over and over and over. This is what leads the Apostle Paul to say in Colossians chapter 2. In him are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. And so, as we think this morning of who Jesus is into this Advent season, of what Isaiah said would be true of this child that would be born as we know now from history, some 700 years later, that he would be wonderful counselor. His name is Wonderful Counselor. And so this is what I want to leave us with today, is simply this, that if he is indeed Wonderful Counselor, then we should heed his counsel. Right? We should listen to his words. We should read the words of Jesus. What I love about reading through the Gospel of Luke up until Christmas, right? There's just so much in there for us to read and understand. And not only should we just read his words, but we should be amazed at his teaching. We should stand in awe of how gracious he is, that what he says, but how he says it as well. These kind of things should stir something up in us. Not just, hey, oh yeah, I know that story. I can tell you that story. I learned that story in Sunday school last week, or the pastor talked about that, or I just read that, and here's how the story goes. And we can kind of recite it and say all the pieces of it. But like, are we in awe? The words of Jesus, are we in awe of the things
that he says. And not only do we read his words and be in awe, but we allow him to be our counselor, that we take comfort from the things he says, that we find direction in our lives from the things that he says, that when he says, take courage, or follow me, or believe in me, or don't worry, or don't be afraid, when he says those things, are those things going to be true of us as we trust and follow Jesus? Back to Joseph. Joseph was left with a decision. Because he had made up his mind. He had resolved what he was going to do, right? And as he's considering how that's going to play out and how that conversation is going to go, here's what Matthew tells us happened in verse 24 of Matthew chapter 1. It says this, when Joseph woke up from his sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. And he took his wife, but didn't know her until she had given birth to a son, and he called his name Jesus. Joseph heeded the counsel the angel sent from God. And I don't know about you, but I am so glad that he did. Now, was it a simple instruction? Was the counsel simple? Sure, it's simple. Don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife. That's pretty simple. Was it easy? Maybe not, right? There was a whole lot that would have been attached to that. There were still risks to be managed. There were still going to be whispers that he was going to hear in his ear from the community. There's going to be things said that maybe simply weren't true, but imagine the courage it took for Joseph to make that decision. And for us too, Jesus never, ever, 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 ever promised us to follow him would be easy. He never ever said that. But as we follow him, he does promise to be with us in it and to lead us through it. His name is Wonderful Counselor. Will we heed his counsel as we trust and follow him? Let me pray for you today. Father, we thank you so much for this Christmas season, for all that is a part of it. We thank you that as we can gather this morning, that we're reminded that Jesus himself is a wonderful counselor. And there's so many things in our lives and in our world today where we just need good counsel, whether that's on a personal level, a national level, an organizational level. Everybody's trying to find the best way forward, and there are competing voices all around. And I pray that particularly through this Christmas season, as we consider these words, the words of Isaiah, the words that Matthew wrote for us, as we are reminded that Jesus is Wonderful Counselor, that among all the competing voices, that we would hear his quite clearly. And as we seek to live lives that are pleasing to you, that glorify your name, God, we know it's not always easy, but we know that you've promised that you'll be with us in it. And so I pray this morning that we would see and understand Jesus as Wonderful Counselor, and that we would take his counsel in decisions that we make with our lives. We pray in Christ's name.